All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar about how to evaluate ideas. We've assembled a few different types of resources for you today, and there's going to be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, so please be thinking of questions as we go through the content here. I also wanted to let everyone know that we are recording this webinar, so it will be possible to access it after the event is over. We'll basically send out a link to anyone who registered and they can find the webinar online. And of course, if you have any questions about IdeaScale or today's event, you can forward them to me. So let's get started here. There are a number of different ways to think about evaluating ideas, but basically all of them are linked to your innovation process, which is why we're going to start by looking at process. Just briefly, we actually have a whole other webinar about building an innovation process, and I will be sending out a link to that in our follow-up. We're going to go from there into a discussion of the different types of evaluation measures when it comes to ideas, and then we're going to align those evaluation types to the stages of the innovation process. Finally, we'll look at some examples of common evaluation criteria before we move into a demonstration of what this looks like in the IdeaScale tool. I'll also be following all of this with citations to the different articles and resources that I utilized during the course of this presentation. So you can reference those materials once the event is over. Now, I imagine that the reason that many of you join this webinar is because you recognize that our ability to create meaningful positive change doesn't just depend on getting good ideas, but it depends on our ability to recognize great ideas. This means that we get a lot of the questions at IdeaScale about idea evaluation. Things like, how do I prioritize good ideas when I have them? How do I control for the fact that I don't have an infinite number of resources to work with for implementation? Or how do I make sure I select ideas that are going to have a positive impact on my organization? And the good news is that having a good approach for idea evaluation really helps all of these issues and more. So let's move on to how this all starts with process. So this is one of my favorite slides. For most people with a good idea, this is what the innovation process feels like. The process doesn't feel nurturing, and good outcomes feel impossible because people don't understand how idea makes it to the end of the process. Now, a successful crowdsourcing campaign usually generates lots of ideas from the crowd, and for those with a good idea, this process should be about filtering, but also building up and bolstering the good ideas that do make it through. So for the entire crowd, a good innovation funnel shows users a clear path from ideation to implementation. And it also helps users understand that their contribution is valued and worthwhile, even if it doesn't make it to the end. Having clear stages and criteria helps your crowd understand why some ideas move forward while others don't. This also provides predictability and transparency to your process, and it helps users create submissions that are closer to what you actually can implement and the ideas that you're seeking. So there are a number of different ways to set up an innovation process, but what you'll notice is that most of these processes, no matter who does them, they resemble a funnel in some way, with a bunch of ideas coming in at the front end and just a few being implemented at the end. In a Harvard Business Review article about a disciplined approach to evaluating ideas, the author talks about their process for idea evaluation when it comes to businesses to invest in, and he notes that of the ones that they evaluate, only about 8% make it to that final stage. So the evaluation methods that you use are basically the stage gates that determine what makes it to the end, which is why it's good to define your evaluation methodology at the same time as you define your process. Some processes look relatively simple, and some are incredibly, well, though sometimes necessarily complex. But whatever kind of process that you use, certain kinds of evaluation are better than others at different points in the funnel. And the filter helps them move through those different processes. So sometimes the more straightforward, those lower barrier evaluation methods occur at the front of the process, and then those more rigorous, in-depth evaluation methods occur at the end of the funnel. So that's why one of the key pieces of advice from the corporate startup is make sure you're asking the right questions at the right time. So let's look at some of these potential evaluation methods and how they might fit into the process. Folding Burritos is this great product development blog, and it's got this great blog post that's a comprehensive resource about the types of ways to prioritize and make product decisions. And what I found is that most of those can be applied to basically any sort of idea prioritization and processing. There are lots of ways, of course, for building out and refining ideas, and you should check out the entire Folding Burritos blog post about those methods, but most of them are represented in different stage functionalities that are provided by IdeaScale, and they fit somewhere along this continuum from the qualitative to the quantitative, from those internal evaluations to the external ones. So this shows a sample IdeaScale process and the action boxes that occur in the tool that are associated with different assessment methods. Some of you might be familiar with IdeaScale's voting, but not everyone uses IdeaScale's team build stage or assessment stage, the pairwise stage, the proposal building stage, funding, estimate. Remember the processes that we were looking at in that last section, the ones that were simple or complicated? No matter what process we are looking at, these are sort of the essential evaluation tools that are used in almost all of them. Similar to kind of how the same ingredients in different orders and different proportions are going to create a different kind of food, these ingredients remain the same in basically every innovation recipe, but the approach, the order, the amount of each, that's what varies. So essentially, these stages align to different types of evaluation methods that are used for filtering IdeaScale ideas. Obviously, the ideation stage can filter ideas by their popularity and the number of votes that they get, but you can also use this stage to do some additional core criteria definition, and that allows an idea to pass-fail based on the information that you request. The team build stage not only empowers collaboration, but it can also be used as a buy-in signal. The review stage aligns those ideas to business goals, and it also helps leadership to address costs or potential risks. The refinement stage is essentially that additional research and investigation that needs to happen in order to assess ideas. The funding stage is an additional validation when it comes to the resources that you have, and the estimate stage allows for some financial analysis. So let's look into what sorts of validation these different stages give us. Pass-fail is pretty easy. It asks for a specific required criteria from an idea at the outset or at any point in order for it to move to a subsequent stage. In IdeaScale, you can do this a few different ways. You can do this by launching a custom field in your idea submission form and communicating that all ideas that meet this minimum level requirement are going to be considered in additional stages. So this could be budget requirements, potential applications of the idea. You simply say, we want ideas that can be implemented in less than 6 months, a year, and then make sure that you ask that question at the front. And those ideas that meet that criteria are the ones that you can move forward to a next stage. There's a great article on innovationmanagement.se that goes into this in more detail, and I'll be forwarding that in our follow-up. So numerous IdeaScale customers use Team Build in order to empower collaboration, like I said. They do it across companies, and they do collaboration around ideas, but some people use the Team Build stage as a validation measure. So imagine an idea that skyrockets to the top of the popular ideas list when it comes to votes, but then when you ask the community who wants to actually dig in, join a team, and volunteer their own time to research an idea, then of course no one joins. I think this is a really great way of telling you about the level of urgency around an idea. The other great advantage of using Team Build as a validation measure is it helps you to maximize your resources. You'll find team members that you didn't know you had, and they're going to help you solve problems without having to actually join your team. The assessment tool is a pretty straightforward measure that rates ideas against criteria on a 5-star scale, as you can see here. And review scale works similarly in that it allows members to rate ideas against criteria that you define on a 3-tier scale. But you can see here the back end, which allows administrators to weight the criteria differently so that it'll prioritize the ideas based off of their strength along those different vectors. What sorts of criteria gets included depends, of course, on the organization and the goals of the initiative. Entrepreneur Magazine published a list of questions from Princeton Creative Research that is for entrepreneurs to determine the merits of an idea or the value they're looking to extract from it. The answers to these questions that they're asking here, they help to define the criteria that ideas should be measured against. The sort of evaluation that occurs in the research and investigation stage is basically asking for additional information. Companies use a lot of traditional proposal development and idea pitching templates during this phase, basically everything from business model canvas, SWOT analysis to CoStar, and it asks for additional information about an idea that helps develop that idea into some sort of proposal or to help it have a business application. The questions in this stage are very commonly about the resource needs associated with the idea, the problem it can solve, for whom it solves that problem, potential strengths and weaknesses. So ideas that can't answer these questions with compelling and concrete responses, they don't generally progress to the later stages. The estimate stage allows companies to look at ideas from a financial perspective. Experts are invited to estimate potential value. They can provide estimates along low, medium, and high estimates, as well as the potential costs. And it'll help you predict what the potential ROI of an investment might be. Typically, but not always, companies will prioritize the ideas with the highest ROI. And the funding stage is both used as a tool for actual resourcing for budget, but also as a validation measure. People can support an idea by pledging not just budget, but maybe tokens or their time to help make it a reality. So this allows community members to kind of put their money where their mouth is. Ideas that seem promising but can't gain any resources, they won't likely proceed to implementation. But what does this mix of evaluation tools look like when it comes to the processes that we were looking at before? So, usually the pass, fail, and popularity are assessed in those earlier stages. Buy-in and additional research happens towards the middle of the process, and then final in-depth alignment and evaluation measures occur at the end of the funnel. The reason things happen in this way is because the evaluation in the initial stages will inform the evaluation in the later stages. So it's difficult, for example, to provide a practical financial assessment without doing some more in-depth research and investigations into the sort of resources necessary, who's going to work on it, the advantages it provides. And so the work done in the refinement or proposal building stage is going to help people do that review for business goals, costs, and all of that. But one of the most common questions that we get from our customers is what sorts of criteria other people are using to evaluate ideas. And although the type of criteria definitely depends on the company, the types of ideas, and the goals of the initiative, we can totally share some suggestions that will help you find your own criteria. So one common description of innovation states that it's the intersection of an idea that has viability, feasibility, and desirability. So this might be a simplified way of looking at good ideas, but it's that definition that encourages some of our customers to evaluate ideas against these three criteria at some point, either as three criteria in an assessment stage, or sometimes they break it up and they assess the desirability, which is derived from voting data and its popularity, and feasibility and viability can be assessed in later stages by specific experts and groups. Another great suggestion for criteria to judge ideas against is your core values. This really helps you align the ideas that you're collecting to your mission and beliefs. There is another great Harvard Business Review article that talks about the difference, of course, between the different value types. So core values are the deeply ingrained driving force of your business, but don't confuse them with the table stakes of permission to play values or the aspirational values that you hope to have someday. Really look at ideas against the core values that are driving your decision making today. You can see some of the values at some leading companies here. Adidas defines its brand against performance, passion, integrity, and diversity. And so they might evaluate ideas by asking how much an idea serves each of those value points. Adobe, by contrast, could look at ideas against their ability to help them stay genuine, be exceptional and innovative, and stay involved. And I've provided some other company examples here from Squarespace, Virgin, and IKEA. But this is really a great opportunity to look at your organization and the values it wants to serve, and then help ideas in your community serve your movement in that direction. So I'll also send a link to an article that shares other leading brands and their core values to give you some ideas. Now, the variety of evaluation criteria is pretty infinite, and we've pulled some of them together from our customers and a few different resources. But in case you can't really parse that word cloud, I've listed them here for you. And this list includes suggestions from a lot of different writers, including Samuel Bacharach's 7 criteria to select the best idea, and Paul Sloan's suggestions in his Evaluating Ideas article, as well as some criteria that's used by actual IdeaScale customers. But you can see that ideas can be evaluated against virtually anything that you want to know about an idea. So it really comes down to what matters most to you. So without further ado, let's get into the IdeaScale solution to see how these look in practice. So you can see an IdeaScale community here, all of the different campaigns that are running in it. That's one of the first things I want to draw your attention to. If you look at ideas in the Money Saving Ideas campaign, you can see that it has one specific process. So you can see that ideas go through their initial ideation and then move into an assessment phase, then team building, additional refinement, and then it's pushed to experts for review and estimates. Then, of course, they report back on what it's been selected and why. And this is, of course, because the team here has some highly specific requirements for the types of ideas that can and can't be implemented. And I pulled up the feedback box campaign as another example, which is a much more open sort of catch-all campaign. And you can see it has far fewer stages. It's got the initial ideas, then some basic evaluation. The selected ideas are then shared and reported on. But let's go back to that money saving campaign, because you've got so many different types of assessment that we can look at. So let's look at that initial assessment to begin. Maybe let's look at the put cell phone towers on all of the parking structures on campus. And if you scroll down to the activity, you can see that ideas are being rated on basically 3 different criteria: the scale of the cost savings, the level of interest, and the likelihood of completing this idea. So in some ways, you can see how these questions basically align to that innovation Venn diagram that we were looking at of feasibility, viability, and desirability. But in this case, they're only asking a panel of experts to provide their ratings against this criteria. And here you can see, or hide, depending on your community settings, each individual's rating of the idea against that different criteria. So let's look at the team build stage as well. We've got an idea in there. This idea, converting all payphone banks into Wi-Fi hotspots. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to build the team out here. So since this is in the team build stage already, you can see the members who are already committed to an idea, as well as the open positions that you might want to volunteer to fill yourself, or assign to different team members. You can also see that you can define what sorts of individuals can fill in which kinds of positions. So you know you want somebody from finance and operations here, somebody from R&D and analyst, but sometimes you just want anybody to volunteer their time. So let's look at the refinement stage. So in this case, on the TPS reports via email, you can see that some of the additional information that they're looking for is associated with the cost estimate, the implementation plan, a more in-depth argument for why you would want to do this. And then let's see, in this more robust review stage, we're using the IdeaScale tool. So let's see what they're evaluating ideas against here. Incentivize commuting by train to save on parking. So you can see that they're looking at ideas across a bunch of different vectors here. How innovative is it? How much profitability can be expected? What level of marketability it has? Its feasibility. But it's also looking at the potential costs associated with the idea, the impact on production and development. And then on the back end, you'd be able to look at this idea in comparison to other ideas for its value along these vectors. Let's look at the estimate stage next. So the estimate stage is going to show the total estimate, and then it's going to invite participation for other estimates of value. And they are using the high, medium, low cost metrics model here. So you can see the potential value and the potential cost, and you can enter in your estimates for each of those things, and then it presents the results so far. And then let's head over to the new features campaign, because they are using the funding stage, but they're using it to gather people to pledge their time to seeing an idea through. So we can look at this idea and decide that we want to fund it. And because I have a budget of hours as a member in this community, I can say, you know what, I want to donate 10 hours to making this idea happen. And that will get it that much closer to its funding goal. So I think that's a basic overview of the different evaluation possibilities for ideas in IdeaScale. But let's go ahead and open it up to questions and see how you're evaluating ideas and what you'd like to do.